Makes me different from everybody else is that I understand things by looking at them. That unless I'm being, completely triggered and in a state of confusion and bewilderment, the way that my mind works is that when I look at things like physical objects, I understand them by looking at them. But beyond that, I understand well beyond just that. Like if I look at a supercharger, I see within the imagination of the person that made it. If I look at a turbo system, I can actually see the turbo system go together. So when it comes to designing something, I see exactly what I would do. And these types of things have always been the case, always. Like my buddy Mike Zaldivar, former mentor, calls me because he is being evaluated for having esophageal surgery. And he tells me that he used to have, acid reflux. And acid reflux was associated with a high level of risk of esophageal cancer. And now, what they're saying is that his esophagus is too short. And so there's a kink in it, right? Where it enters the stomach, and that causes food and other things to accumulate there. And it continues to progress the irritation leading to cancer. And so they want to do surgery. Well, when he's describing this to me, I see his stomach. I see the distance. I see internally to his body, but I also understand the mechanics of breathing, diaphragmatic breathing versus breathing with the ribs. And so I tell him, I'm like, no, 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 no. Did you go to physical therapy? He's like, yes. I was like, did they isolate your diaphragm to cause it to start to be neurologically activated again for your breathing? He's like, no, but they're going to do surgery. I'm like, that's crazy. I'm like, do you have an ACE bandage? What you need to do is you need to fully exhale every morning and have your wife wrap your rib cage. You need to get a breathing device, and we need to start to train your diaphragm. I said, because what's likely to have happened is that from the acid reflux, when you breathe, your diaphragm contracts and increases intra-abdominal pressure to reduce thoracic cavity pressure. And so your diaphragm contracts and pushes down on your stomach. And when it does that, it's likely that what was occurring was that it was pushing stomach acid out. And so your brain learned to relax the diaphragm, and you started breathing using your rib cage. And so you also likely increased your thoracic cavity, and the posture reflex at the level of spinal cord has been reset. And so you're probably more barrel chested than you were before. And since you're walking around with an increased thoracic volume, your stomach has transcended into your thoracic cavity, thus reducing the distance between your esophagus, and your mouth and your stomach. And so it wasn't that you have a congenital defect, it's that the mechanics of breathing are in two stages, that normally you breathe with your diaphragm, but you see, if you had pain, then you would have stopped diaphragmatic breathing and transformed the mechanism through which you breathe. And after the surgery, we would need to have, caused you to resume diaphragmatic breathing. And we could reset the posture reflex in a very short period of time. You see, if you exhale fully and you squeeze your rib cage all the way down, and then we immobilize your rib cage, it's going to reinstitute diaphragmatic breathing on a neurological level. And what that's going to do is reducing your thoracic cavity is going to displace your stomach back into your abdominal cavity. And then if you do that and you go back and they do the same scans, they're going to find that your esophagus has been restored to a normal appearance, that you're going to have eliminated the kink. And so I said, you see, there's a disconnect between your surgeon and your physical therapist, but I want you to go and tell your medical team what I've told you, and get yourself a spring-loaded breathing device and start to do exercises. You're going to want to start 3 days a week potentially, and you'll strengthen your diaphragm as well. And so we need to normalize diaphragmatic breathing, because since you've had that cardiac sphincter fixed, you no longer have acid reflux, but the breathing mechanics are based upon that pathology. And so, because you had a leaky stomach, you could not diaphragmatic breathe because your diaphragm contracting would push on your stomach and force the acid out. Well, you don't have that anymore. And so now we've got to retrain the posture mechanism as well as the neuromuscular facilitation of your diaphragm muscle. Well, you see, that's the way my mind works. So when people talk to me, as opposed to analyzing them to be right or wrong, I can understand the world from their point of view, emotionally, as well as what it is that they see and what they're describing. And rather than having it be opinion, you see, I did not realize that I live in a world of ego, and that when I share things that I see, people evaluate, judge, and criticize me based on some entitlement to subordinate or compare me or tell me I shouldn't understand something. And so when I conceive of a supercharger in my mind and want to make it, I couldn't understand why everybody would hate on it, why someone would laugh or tease or call me names. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand why somebody couldn't understand why that intercooler would automatically be the best based on its cross-sectional area, based on the best intercooler core on the planet, based on being the only intake-based, cooling system with 8 water ports, divided end tanks to normalize intake air temperatures throughout the entire intake track, to have the lowest pressure drops, highest flow, best cooling capacity, lowest pressure drop, highest volumetric efficiency, intake air temps that would be completely under your control, an 18-inch by 13-inch core, a 3.2-inch thick core, the biggest air-to-water core cross-sectional area in any system in the world is sitting in my room, and it was supposed to be at the PRI show in 2021, and I got sabotaged. And that I could walk in a supercharger design that goes on every single engine because I modularized it to mitigate the cost, saying this will be pretty expensive. But if I take one design and everything I do is modularized, that one core for my high ram works for my intake systems, every single high ram. It works for my supercharger that I could put on top. The other supercharger, I could change the intake runners and input shaft and put it on a big block. And understanding the physics, I could describe that, and discovering new physics involved in the inlet side. I was just trying to introduce design ideas. And I thought that the other people would use those too. That because I make billet, that the other companies wouldn't see me as a threat per se. And rather than being embraced or supported, I've been sabotaged. That everybody gets upset, everybody challenges you. People think that you're saying things, but you're frustrated because they seem so obvious. I remember, being frustrated because when I saw companies canceling the 3100 superchargers, I already knew they would fail. I knew it already. I already knew the physics of what was going on in the inlets. And that's why my design looked the way it did. And it wasn't for airflow, and so I published that and it made everyone mad. But I was frustrated because I was being sabotaged internally. Like I was trying to make it and then they canceled it. My same team didn't want to do it anymore. And I couldn't understand why I could describe in great detail the physics and, the market. And, I knew that if I produced a billet supercharger with all the things that I did, the total cost of my supercharger would be less than taking any supercharger out there, porting it, changing the brick and the inside, putting a billet thing, changing the pulleys, changing the heat exchanger. That if you added up everything you do to make a supercharger perform to peak efficiency for racing applications, The total sum of all my stuff that I would sell that would be highly engineered and unable to be even approximated by the most modified supercharger, that nobody could see it, or they had a vested interest in, devaluing, negating me, and that nobody would authenticate me on account of, say, no experience or education. And I would have thought that being able to generate a supercharger in my imagination in 5 minutes might say something unique, you know. And so, like, now I've mastered psychology in the same way. And then people will say, because I'm not educated, that I'm unqualified. Yet, those are people that don't even have the ability to make a single cognitive contribution to the field of study. That those are people that are absorbing, parroting, and paraphrasing ideas that they wouldn't have the cognitive skills to generate independently. And that if I said I didn't even need to read a book on psychology to remaster it, then they wouldn't understand it. And so it wouldn't matter if I mastered finance and made a millionaire. It doesn't matter if I do something and demonstrate it. It's like I have to build a 2,000 horsepower car, and then I can do it, where I could have done it already. And it's the sabotage, the negation. Okay, so I bought my first ratchet set in 2015. Like, started working on cars. I was doing 1,000 horsepower cars day one. Like I don't learn the same way. I learn by looking at things. I don't understand them by memorizing factoids. I see dynamics, I see physics, I see the three-dimensional model of an internal combustion engine that started when I was 5, when my father showed me how an engine worked by using his hand as a piston, his forearm as a connecting rod. His elbow was connected to a crankshaft like a bicycle, he explained, and then I could see it. And then I could see that on motorcycle engines when I'd look at them. I could build a remote control car from scratch as a child on my first try with no father. When I go to Virginia and I find a moped sitting out in the woods, I can take it apart, and I pulled the whole transmission apart. Didn't even know that. And I looked at it and I realized it's a twin centrifugal clutch system, and I got it to shift into second gear. I found a riding tractor and got that running. People threw away junk, and I was 12 years old, and now I've got a moped, and now I've got a tractor, and I'm driving a tractor and a moped. I rebuilt my motor in my Lincoln, and then I put it in a Mustang, and that became my college car. And, but yet the education system said I was learning disabled, and so I was stigmatized. You see, my problems, I looked up to everybody else, that I lived in a world that said I'm stupid, I'm crazy all the time. That's all I've gotten. And so when everyone tells me no, 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 and I'm just fighting, and I've been looking for a yes. Just one yes. And then I go through everything to make superchargers, that I get aerospace engineers and pay them to make my stuff. And then I got to go through lawsuits, and I try to perfect GTO kits for those guys, and they say I'm the scam artist, and they ruin my business. And then they come to my shop and they lose $50,000 moving out. And while everybody's calling me a scam artist, I'm writing a book on modern psychology to help everybody. That I've actually looked at medical cures for the narcissists. Yeah. I'm talking to the guy that runs nuclear medicine at the City of Hope, because he created sugar-based molecules to cross the blood-brain barrier to be able to help people identify cancer cells in the brain. And I'm talking to him about that for beta blockers, because I know that beta blockers can't cross the blood-brain barrier, and that all of these dissociative disorders, from schizophrenia to psychopathy to narcissistic personality, including the subjective experience of all people that makes them want to figure it out and be perfect their whole life and projecting their own not good enough on people like me, and I'm trying to cure them. And so I'm trying to cure mental illness so I could try to make a world I could live within. And I've developed a methodological approach that produces what was normally called enlightenment, which is my world normal. It's called being present in the moment, and they tear you apart for having that ability, for having the ability to see the future, for having the ability to see everything, for having the ability to understand and predict what will happen if you do things, but you're so entitled to your yellow brick road fantasies of some future where you're perfect, where you're finally good enough, and you need more than me in order for you to feel okay. And so you want to destroy, troll, pick apart, use, and discard people like me. And then you want to tell me I'm a liar. And then you want to tell me I'm the scam artist. And you think that somebody with my gifts and abilities needed to sell car parts to people with a 2004 salvage title Rodnock LS1 GTO? You really think that I would have bought 20 kits worth of material, hired aerospace engineers, and designed billet flanges that enabled you to just put bolts in and a gasket and drop a whole turbo kit on the driver's side of a GTO in one movement, because I made it so you could assemble it outside of the car and put it in? A whole hot side that goes in 5 minutes, clears AC, heater core hoses, stop dipstick tubes, 2-inch primary tubes, reduces cross-sectional area to mitigate the heat, and allows for the use of a filter and integrated wastegates to remove all of the surface area for heat transfer, clearing everything from ABS to power steering, with 3-inch exhaust single pipes that are perfected geometrically so they go on effortlessly. And I could show you a hot side that can go on your car in 2 minutes. And you can install a whole turbo kit faster than you could make spark plug wires for someone else's kit. And the only reason I did it is because of my own experiences working on the other kits. And I wanted to give something to you, that I wanted to make a difference. And in a world of profit and planned obsolescence, I've got everything from hybrid drive systems to systems for using algae to make ethanol-based fuels from sewage, to oiling systems on 2,000 horsepower cars that allow vegetable oil to be run in the crankcase. Water cooling systems that allow computerized control of engine coolant, fuel, engine oil, and transmission fluid temperatures, and taking the heat away from the engine bay. Oiling systems that are on my car that prevent all engine wear by priming the engine and working in tandem with mechanical pumps that go on any single vehicle today, and that allow computer control for cavitation-free oiling at 1/3 the cost of a dry sump. Hybrid drive systems that I was going to produce to even be modern superchargers. Electronic superchargers that could be remote mount, like just endless things, school shooting alarm systems, non-lethal ammunitions, hybridized trailer systems for big rigs, and radial motors from Borg Warner that could be coupled with small Duramax engines that would go in commercial trucks right away. Anything and everything. And I see it, and I have the parts lists and the designs, and I pay, and I give people money, and they steal and they cheat. And I couldn't understand it, because I thought if I explained it to you, that you would see what I see, but you don't see anything, because you live in an analytical, narcissistic, entitled world of trying to figure out everything because your mind is shut down. And I had to discover the neurological basis for your own entrapment in a subjective reality. And I know that subconscious does not really exist, that the subconscious described in human psychology is only because they don't understand the neurological pathways of the autonomic nervous system. They don't understand that there's afferent and efferent neuronal pathways in the brain that are literally mapping the cerebral cortex during the activation of fight or flight reactions to create perceptions and responses in animals that need not the higher functions cerebral cortex, once they form these neurological pathways that are automatically generated based on the activation of previously mapped neurological pathways. A form of memory absent any experience creates a nonsensical positive feedback neurological pathology in all human beings, resultant in the formation of ego. The same thing that Jesus discovered, that Buddha discovered, that Werner Erhard transformed into transformation, I've discovered the scientific neurological basis rooted in evolutionary biology, animal psychology, the methodological approaches of enlightenment. I can describe that as a neurological activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, freeing the consciousness from the cognitive impairments of norepinephrine that block the transmission of environmentally tuned cognitions, lowering the cognitive and intellectual abilities of all men, women, and children that exist in a modern world where language contaminated a brain that was previously designed over millions of years, gifted with this profound secondary reality we call it imagination, a gift from God. And how we're created in the likeness of our Creator is this infinite consciousness that exists within all people, simply obscured because you're cut off from it, neurologically speaking. And having developed a methodological approach that directly addresses the psychological dynamic that is associated with the neurological pathway that includes an efferent signal that relegates your total sum of cognitive processes to subconscious at the age of 5 for all normal people that suffer internal reactions of fight or flight, entrapping them in paradoxically four malformations of not good enough, broken, confusion, abandonment, where the separation anxiety of an animal that goes away as a function of their physical development is a neurological pathway that was captured at the age of 5. And now all people experience heartbreak as a subjective reality collapse, as the future that they were living into to try to offset the suffering of today falls apart. And so it's the future that fell apart that you depended on for hope that leaves you heartbroken as you're stuck in the avoidance of the flight of cat, not wanting to experience the rejection that you arbitrarily project, the failure that you arbitrarily project. And as you try to fix and change yourself and suppress other people because you're living in a hierarchy, because the only way you could be good enough is a subjective comparison to other people in this arbitrary, nonsensical, narcissistic game of more that is going to drive humanity to its own destruction. And you can't even notice that or notice me.